new discovery which has not yet been published. But before I tell you about that, people will say, well, big deal, so what? Why is history important at all? History is extremely important. Imagine if I could take from each one of you as an individual everything you knew about your life up to last week and just erase it. Where would you be? You'd be lost. You'd be incompetent. You wouldn't know how to plan for the future. And you do the same thing with a people. If you erase their history or you don't tell enough about their past, they also become incompetent and they can't fulfill the future. And that's why a lot of people in the black community have felt, well, how come all of the dreams of the civil rights movement aren't yet fulfilled? And one reason is because this history is still suppressed. It still isn't taught. But there's been a recent discovery which is going to blow the lid off of all that. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, basically, what science has now found, although this is suppressed for the most part, there have been some great researchers. You have some wonderful books there, like by Ivan van Sertima, who's talking about these things. This is not taught in your public schools, although it will be. The history that the children are learning today is not going to be the history that's going to be taught in the next 25 years. It's going to be radically different. We now know for a fact that long before Columbus, there were 4 major migrations of blacks to the Americas, different parts of the Americas, for totally different reasons, totally separated from each other by many centuries. But nonetheless, there were these black, you can call them migrations, but they were not entirely. I'll describe, and you can make up your own mind what they were. The most recent of these took place about 400 years before Columbus was even born, and it's all outlined in a marvelous book over there. It's called The Golden Trade of the Moors. And it is now known that the West African kingdom of Mali had huge fleets of merchant vessels, and that these kings, these black kings of West Africa, began sailing across the Atlantic to Mexico as early as 900 AD. Now, why did they do that? They did that for trade, not for conquest or invasion. They did this for trade. Mali was very wealthy in gold. They had lots of minerals. Some of the black kingdoms, they were called the Yoruba or the Benin. They were great workers in bronze. But the trouble with West Africa, and it's still a trouble today, not enough food, famine. Somehow, the black kings of Mali had preserved this tradition of long before, where there was this kingdom across the sea, a totally different one. It was very hard to reach. You needed to have excellent ships and good sailors. And nobody in Europe was doing it at this time. But if you cross that sea, this other kingdom across the Atlantic was very rich in a certain kind of food, which the people over there called maize. We now call corn. And these West African kings launched at least 2 major fleets, trading ventures, that went across the Atlantic 900 AD to about 1600 AD. And they brought over their bronze work, and they taught the Mexican people, the ancient Mexican people, who were then known as the Mayas. The Mayas had built up a great kingdom of their own, but in 900 AD they were in decline. They were really on the outs. Nobody knows exactly why, but their society was in decline. They were losing all of their technology. Then these black fleets came across from West Africa, from Mali, and they presented a lot of gold work, bronze work, and in return, they came back with shiploads of corn, maize. Now we know for sure that this actually happened because very recently, you'll see in the next issue of our magazine, not this issue, the next issue is coming out in about 2 weeks. This is part of the discoveries are happening so fast and furious, it's hard to keep track. They now have found that a certain type of maize or corn which is growing in West Africa, has been growing there for many centuries, is not native to West Africa. It is a type of corn which comes from Mexico. Could have only been brought over by these Mali seafarers over 1,000 years ago. So this is a first concrete proof that they beat Columbus by centuries. And we're not just on a voyage of exploration. They were going back and forth, bringing corn back. Now, why don't we know about that? Well, this trade stopped abruptly 1600 AD. 1600 AD, the Spanish, the Portuguese run a real aggressive colonizing campaign, and they took over Africa, and they destroyed a lot of these kingdoms. And with the destruction of these kingdoms went all the knowledge and all the history of these past trades. This is a tremendous lesson for us because, you know, we're so proud of our American civilization. We think it'll go on forever. But when a civilization falls, history tells us it takes almost all memory of it with it. Civilization is really very fragile. And that's why these lessons from the past are very, very important. If we want to preserve our civilization, we have to learn what happened to these others that crashed. So we know for sure between 900 and 1600 AD, long before Columbus was even born, as I say, these blacks were trading, these black kingdoms were trading with Mexico. This is something I hadn't got time to go into because it's so long, but it's really interesting. This is a drawing from life that was made, believe it or not, of a so-called American Indian, the southern coast of California. He was a member of the Chumash, no longer exist. When the Spaniards met up with these people, they said, these are civilized Indians. They got along extremely well with them. The reason why they got wiped out, though, was because they had no immunity to the diseases that the Spaniards brought over. And so they were all wiped out. This is the last of them, about the mid of the early 19th century. They were a black people who built fantastic boats. They were like Viking boats, believe it or not. They were lab-straked, over one plank over the other, so they were very resilient in the water. They had a tradition that they did not originate in America. They came from this great island out across the Pacific, and they lived in a number of islands off of California. One of them is Santa Barbara. You've heard that, Santa Barbara. And they called Santa Barbara Limu. That was their name for it. So this man, probably the last of the Chumash, one of the last of the Chumash, represents one of these people from Mu, the very early times. These are representations from Ivan Van Sertima's book. You've got one of them here. It's excellent. These are one of the Olmec heads. This is one of the figurines that are found throughout Mexico. What's interesting is that these people are never portrayed as servile or slavish. They're always portrayed as prosperous, as bringing things, bringing metals.
Christopher Columbus did not discover America. Exactly. I mean, never mind the question of like how you can discover a place where the inhabitants are watching you arrive from the shore. Yeah, they weren't wearing pants. Is that what somebody said? I like that. So anyway, there were actually many other mariners before Columbus that discovered America as well. Decades earlier, even eons earlier, there were so many people that were coming across these islands and this continent. But it's only been in the last century that evidence has surfaced and continually grown to indicate that many of these pre-Columbian explorers might have come from Africa. So the first scientist to promote this possibility was Leo Wiener. Born in Russia, Wiener immigrated to the United States in the late 19th century on his way to British Honduras, where he planned to open a vegetarian commune. Well, when that turned out not to be the dream job he expected, he moved back to the United States and he became a professor at Harvard University, as one does. But in his time in Mesoamerica, he started noticing things. There are lots of things that led him to encounter certain discoveries that made him consider that possibly if the origins of American civilization might actually be in Africa. So he observed so many linguistic and botanical and other similarities that between 1920 and 1922, he published an extensive 3-volume piece called Africa and the Discovery of America. Now, unfortunately, this is the 1920s, so as yet, no serious archaeological evidence had been done or work had been done to support his botanical theories, because everyone was over raiding tombs in Egypt and things like that. Nod to Howard Carter. So he didn't have a whole lot of other stuff than the names to support him. However, he knew that other clues must exist. For example, he pointed out that Columbus himself was aware that African mariners had preceded him. In his diary of his second voyage, Columbus tells of how the natives of Hispaniola actually had given him gold-tipped metal spearheads that they said were brought by black-skinned people who had come in large boats from the south and southeast. Coincidence? I think not. No. So what's interesting about that, so upon returning to Spain, is that he actually took the spearheads and he sent them away and they had them assayed, and it turned out to be that these spearheads were covered in this metal this alloy that the inhabitants called guanin, and the metallurgists actually found out that this was an alloy of 32 parts. It was like 18 of gold, 6 of silver, 8 of copper, which, dun dun dun, matched the metal used in spearheads made in Western Africa for thousands of years, as carried by medieval African warriors, including the Mali and the Moors. The West Africans even called this metal guanine, the same name used by the natives of Hispaniola. But nothing more was said about that. Conspiracy. Well, probably because, in the interest of Spain, it was in their best interest that they didn't want to have any challenges to their discovery and the claims to the islands of the West Indies. Well, as the poem goes, or it should anyway, in 1493, Columbus stole all he could see. Yeah, so on his second voyage, which was 10 times larger than the first, Columbus went on a frantic but unsuccessful island-hopping trip to find gold and spices. He carried along several natives from his newly discovered San Salvador, which the inhabitants called Guanahanvi. Another island that the natives pointed out, which was really large, and was called Soameto. Soameto. Now, Columbus continued going around whimsically renaming every island he could find. But, Leo Wiener, being the curious person and the linguist that he was and the etymologist, he couldn't help noticing that the origin of these many place names and botanical names in Mesoamerica actually sounded distinctly like other languages in Africa, particularly Bantu and even Arabic. Wiener and numerous other botanists have also puzzled over the presence of certain plants that predated Columbus but originated in Africa. For example, the calabash bottle gourds. Now, this is a species originally from West Africa, where they were well cultivated in America before Europeans arrived. Now, even long before they existed in Indonesia or Polynesia. So, in fact, the Pacific was the last place that bottle gourds actually reached and expanded to. Pardon my covfefe. Well, if it were not for transatlantic trade pre-Columbian times, it would be very difficult to explain how certain plants, such as the yam, the sweet potato, domesticated cotton, peanuts, and tobacco, reached both West Africa and the Americas. The spread of the plantain is particularly noteworthy because it could not remain viable if it was carried in salt water. Well, in the 1640s, a Brazilian botanist named George Marcgrave. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Speaking of botany, Ricola. Yeah, there we go. So thank you very much. So the Brazilian botanist George Marcgrave wrote that the establishment of a particular varieties of plantains in this region stands as a strong argument for ancient maritime contact between the Americas and Africa. That's bananas. B-A-B-A-N-A-S. That's right. Thank you. All right. Excuse me. All right. Yeah. Okay. So, how do these plants and languages? That's going to be good for the video. All right. Fix and pose. All right, use the cough drop. Okay, so how do these plants and languages and other cultural elements get to the Americas? Well, some believe, so what's that? Well, you're cheating. Well, some people believe that, over thousands of years, Africans migrated out of Africa and then over the Bering Strait, then down into South America, and things like that. Well, another explanation exists, and so get ready. There you go. Let it out of your system. Awesome. Africans had ships. In fact, they had four kinds of. They had unbelievable. They had a shipload of vessels, and they had away. The anchors way. So, in fact, they had four kinds of vessels, and Nubian pottery. This is an example of Nubian pottery with a painting on it that shows a long-hold pottery art. That shows either a long-hold boat or a papyrus raft or a hauled-out canoe. And then this other painting beside it is from, the first one was from 3000 BC, and this is a bird's-eye view of an oared riverboat
East Africa.
in Chad. And it dates from 3500 BCE. Now, the Africans of Guinea also had dugout canoes hewn from these monumental trees on the coast there. In 1500, it's just a few years after Columbus's voyage, the Portuguese captain Pacheco Pereira wrote, "In this country can be found the largest canoes made of a single trunk. Some are so large that they hold 80 men." Now, the West Africans were known to lash two dugout canoes together, side by side, and no one questions the seaworthiness of a similar type of Polynesian catamarans. Well, here's a 15th century Portuguese painting of sailing canoes on the Congo estuary. The Portuguese, like Captain Pereira, had heard that African traders were visiting Brazil in the mid-1400s. So to demonstrate that mariners from West Africa could have sailed to the Americas using papyrus vessels as early as 2000 BCE, Norwegian adventurer Tor Heyerdahl actually used ancient shipbuilding techniques in order to construct and sail the Ra 1 and the Ra 2 in 1969 and 70. And generally, some type of sailing vessel will average about 100 miles per day, even without sails. And in an ocean current, something like a raft or a reed boat can average about 60 miles a day. Now, Islamic historian Amir Hajib reported that voyages west from Mali were happening in the year 1311, just 150 years before Columbus. Now, when he asked the Mali emperor, shown here, incidentally, holding a globe of the world made of solid gold, asked him, well, tell me about this rumor about Atlantic travel. And he said that his predecessor had commissioned an expedition with 200 ships filled with men and a similar number with gold and water and enough provisions for 2 years. And he said, go out and find something. And if you don't come back, so you find something or you run out of food. And unfortunately, only one ship returned, and the captains told the emperor that we sailed for a very long time until we met what seemed like a river with a strong current flowing in the open sea. I was the last ship, and I turned where I was and did not enter the current. The others disappeared. I do not know what became of them. So, well, this story seems to describe the trade wind-driven equatorial current, or the Canary Current. Now, I apologize if anyone has any cats on their lap at the moment, but so we basically have two rivers, two circular rivers in the ocean here, and you can see it's very easy for Africans from the south and the Angola regions to come up towards the equator and going westwards, or from the western coast of Africa north of the equator to go eastwards along that same current. But you know, this Mercator projection doesn't really, in terms of cartography, boo Mercator. It really doesn't do it justice. So let me just, I did this little animation for you to show that they could have taken the Canary Current up and around, and then they go over they fall off the edge of the earth, and then they come back and they make landfall back again in Cape Verde. So it is definitely possible. So I definitely had to do that. Now, at least a dozen explorers, including Constantine Ravanus, reported seeing blacks upon reaching the New World. In fact, in 1513, Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa, who you might know because people named a very popular dance after him. Anyway, so When Balboa was there, he said he met members of a tribe of Ethiopians in Panama. And according to Balboa's log, these men came from a totally black village that was 2 days' journey away. And he figured that these blacks had come from Ethiopia at a much earlier date. So there are also examples of physical evidence, including pre-Columbian African skeletons, which have been found throughout the Americas. Now, dating between 800 BCE and 300 CE, these murals are from the Temple of the Warriors at Chichen Itza. Now, they clearly feature, the color version is easier to see, but they clearly feature three races. And it's depicting black and Indian allies and a battle against white invaders. Now, because of their long blonde hair jewelry, a skin-hulled boat that we have here, right there, and also the fact that they're fighting naked, which was common for warriors from Ireland, they believe that these are Celtic warriors. And because this mural shows that blacks are clearly fighting on the side of the Mayans, that they must have been integrated into society much longer before this painting was done in order to form that form of alliance. Now, there are numerous pre-Columbian figurines with striking similarities to ancient African artwork, and they've been found in Central and South America. In southeastern Mexico, there are 18 rock statues of heads up to 11 feet tall that are facing the ocean, looking east. Now, archaeologists call them the Olmec colossal heads, after the people that carved them. And they were produced for 50 to 200 years and date from at least 900 BCE, when they were mysteriously buried for some reason. So now think about it. It took enormous effort to quarry these. The smallest one was 6 tons, so 6 to 50-ton blocks, to quarry them and carry them 75 miles away from the quarry, and then carve them, and then erect them. These people that they modeled them after must have been important. Whoever they were, they must have been important to be remembered or obeyed or worshipped. Well, Jose Meglia Serrano, the archaeologist who first uncovered them, he pointed out that facial features look amazingly like African blacks, and they all display distinctive headgear or protective helmets. Now, however, some people think that these are actually the facial figures of overweight babies. Yeah, I think they needed to wear helmets when they were babies, if they think that. So, yeah. And then still others find it easier to believe that instead of Africans, those depicted or responsible for these sculptures, and as well as the Mesoamerican pyramids, were not African Americans, but dun dun dun. So why is it that so many people have never heard of this alternative of American discovery by the continent's nearest neighbors to the east? Racism! Yeah. So, I mean, look. Now, the thing, exactly. Whoa, where'd all the continents go? So, this is... Look at how close this is. I mean, white people don't think that you could go this is closer compared to more than twice the distance that Columbus sailed. This will win a drink for you in a bar game sometime. Which state is closest to Africa? Brazil. Maine. Yeah, look. See there, you got to need a globe for this. Look at that. Versus yeah, geometry, science. There you go. So anyway, so very few Americans know this. And why is this? So having examined textbooks throughout for years up until 2018, James W. Lowen says that although some books cite the alternative possibility that Vikings, Norse, or even Irish may have reached America first, not one textbook, old or new, mentions the West Africans. So whether or not you give any credence to this admittedly controversial Afrocentric theory, it's obvious that Columbus was not the first to discover America, but the last. So why did he make such an indelible mark on Western people's minds? Well, conquest may have a lot to do with it. Right, Eurocentrism. Unlike the mundanity of perhaps thousands of years of peaceful African transatlantic trade, the quest for gold and world domination makes a much better story. And, the good Queen Isabella was so proud of her fella that she immediately equipped Columbus with 17 ships, 1,500 men, 200 cannons, crossbows, cavalry, and even 20 attack dogs for a second voyage. And another, and another. The story of Columbus remains the most widely accepted version of American discovery, most likely because it was the most recent, the most well-armed, the most documented, and the most similar in appearance to the authors of American textbooks. And one other thing that should be pointed out here is that in the years after Columbus discovered America, in 400 years, 20 million Africans were stripped from the coast of Africa, half of them dying in transit for slavery, who knows how many fleeing inland. And at the same time, within 5 years of Columbus's arrival in the New World, 90% of the indigenous population had died from disease or murder, 90%. So the fact is, that leaves few people to have a written or memory or an oral history of the seafaring of their African discoverers. Historian Samuel D. Marble wrote, "As a subject for research, the possibility of African discovery of America has never been a tempting one for American historians. We choose our own history, or more accurately, we select those vistas of history that more or less kind of explain to have the promise of the greatest satisfaction for ourselves. And we have had little appetite to explore the possibility that our founding father was a black man." So nevertheless, there is considerable evidence to suggest that African mariners also participated in this great adventure, no less than Vikings, the Portuguese, Spaniards, Celts, Chinese, Polynesians, and Arabs, and others. So now I would like to raise a toast to all the discoverers of America before Columbus, wherever you may came from. May more of us discover you. Thank you.